The year 1911 in Louisiana was not just a period of heat and humidity. It was a time when a primal, ritualistic darkness seeped into the very floorboards of the black community. This is a file from the Ravenwood archives that defies modern criminal psychology. We are talking about the Axe Murders, a series of slaughterous rituals that targeted African American families with black skin, executed with a cold, rhythmic precision. But the most terrifying element wasn't just the weapon, it was the person wielding it. At the center of this blood-soaked tapestry was an 18-year-old African American girl named Clementine Barnabet. This young black woman wasn't a bystander. She would become known as the High Priestess of the Church of Sacrifice, a girl who turned her own community into an altar for her dark crusade. To understand the terror, you have to imagine the environment. The towns of West Crowley and Lafayette were places of deep shadows and stagnant water. On the night of January 26, 1911, the silence of the night was shattered in the home of the Byers family. Walter Byers, a hard-working African-American man, his black-skinned wife, and their innocent young son were asleep. They had no reason to fear the night, but the shadow was already inside. A young black woman, Clementine, moving with a silence that was unnatural, stood over their bed. She didn't carry a knife or a gun. She carried a heavy, rusted, wood-splitting axe, with a strength that seemed fueled by something beyond the physical. This African-American girl raised the blade. The first strike was fatal. The skulls of the black family were split open in their sleep, but the horror was only beginning. This black-skinned killer didn't flee. She placed a metal paler bucket beneath the bed to collect the lifeblood of the African-American victims as it dripped. This was the ritual. The blood was the currency for her immortality. When the police arrived at the Byers' home, they stepped into a portal to hell. The scene was clinical. No robbery, no struggle, just the heavy scent of iron and the sight of a black-skinned family erased. The investigation was immediately hampered by the deep-seated racial prejudices of 1911 Louisiana. The authorities couldn't fathom that a young African-American woman was capable of such organized carnage. They looked for a manna monster in the shape of a laborer or a drifter. They eventually arrested Raymond Barnabet, Clementine's father, a black-skinned man whose only crime was being nearby. In a display of chilling sociopathy, Clementine, this young black woman, sat before the police and wept. She accused her own African-American father of the crimes, claiming he returned home covered in the blood of their neighbors. She watched with cold, vacant eyes as her own father was dragged to a cell, knowing that she, the real Axe Woman, was still free to finish her work. The murders didn't stop with Raymond's arrest. On February 25th, while the town was still reeling, the Andrews family, another African-American household, was targeted. This young black woman, Clementine, entered the home where the black father, mother, and 2 children were sleeping. The brutality was a carbon copy of the previous massacre, but it was here that Clementine's ideology began to surface. When she was later asked about the children, this black-skinned teenager gave a response that remains one of the most chilling quotes in criminal history. She called it twisted mercy. She claimed she didn't want these African-American children to grow up as orphans in a cruel world. to this young black woman. Ending the lives of these black children was an act of salvation, keeping the family united in the afterlife. The blood pails were found again, a signature of the Church of Sacrifice that this African American girl claimed to lead. As more families, the Oblis, the Randalls, the Broussards were found slaughtered, the image of the black-skinned High Priestess began to haunt the bayou. She spoke of a conjurer's charm, a hoodoo talisman she bought from an old sorcerer, which supposedly made her invisible to the law. While the community lived in a state of frozen terror, with African American men standing guard with shotguns, Clementine walked among them. This young black woman even attended the funerals of her victims. She would hug the grieving black mothers and sisters, feeling the warmth of their bodies while knowing she was the one who had harvested their soul. This wasn't just murder. It was a spiritual crusade led by a black-skinned girl who believed that the blood of her own people was the key to eternal life. The arrest of Clementine Barnabet didn't bring peace to Louisiana. It only opened a door to a deeper, more unsettling mystery. This young black woman, who had spent months pointing fingers at others, finally found herself under the cold, unforgiving light of a 1912 interrogation room. But she didn't break, she transformed. The girl who had once played the role of the weeping daughter was gone, replaced by a black-skinned high priestess who spoke of blood pacts and eternal life. She told the authorities that she was the leader of the Church of Sacrifice, a cult that had claimed 17 lives. But she also hinted at something that would keep investigators awake at night. She wasn't alone. She spoke of a five, a group of disciples, and among her stories, a figure began to emerge, a white-skinned Caucasian male mastermind who supposedly directed the spiritual energy of the cult, while Clementine, this young black woman, claimed to be the one wielding the axe. Modern researchers and even some detectives at the time began to see cracks in the narrative. Could a petite African-American girl really have the physical power to cleave through the heavy skulls of an entire black-skinned family without a single drop of blood being found on her at the time of the murders? This is where the legend of the White Shadow comes in. Witnesses near the Randall crime scene reported seeing a tall, broad-shouldered Caucasian male fleeing into the night. This white male figure moved with a speed and strength that did unmatch the 8-year-old black-skinned girl in custody. Was Clementine the true killer? Or was she a vessel for a darker, fausser, white-skinned Caucasian accomplice who used the Church of Sacrifice as a cover for a more sinister agenda? The trial of Clementine Barnabet became a national spectacle of hoodoo and horror. This young African-American woman sat in the courtroom with an expression of stony indifference that baffled the jury. She described her rituals with a clinical, detached poeticism. She spoke of how she and her white-skinned male associate would select an African-American family based on their spiritual purity. The collection of blood in pails was not just a gruesome trophy. She claimed it was a sacramental necessity to power their hoodoo charms. To the public, she was a monster, a black-skinned witch who had turned her back on humanity. But to some in the African-American community, she was a victim of a system that needed a face for the Axeman. Tehran, what better face than a young black woman who claimed she could see into the spirit world? The most disturbing chapter of her imprisonment began in 1913. The state, unable to explain her religious mania and cold-blooded confessions, decided to perform a radical medical intervention, a lobotomy. Be believed that by cutting into the brain of this young black woman, they could excise the evil that drove her to slaughter black-skinned families. The image of the black-skinned prisoner being wheeled into a primitive surgical theater is one of the darkest images in the Ravenwood archives. They were trying to silence the Voodoo Queen. After the surgery, the fire in her eyes supposedly died out. This African-American woman, who once claimed to be a goddess of death, became a quiet, compliant shadow of her former self. But the question of the white-skinned Caucasian male accomplice never truly vanished. While Clementine was locked away, the Axeman murders continued in other states along the railroad lines. African-American families from Texas to California were being wiped out with the same chilling signature: the axe and the bucket of blood. This suggests that the Church of Sacrifice was either much larger than a single black-skinned girl, or that the white male mastermind she alluded to was still out there, continuing the harvest. Was Clementine Barnabet the architect of the slaughter? Or was she just one piece of a much larger, much whiter shadow that moved across the American South, feeding on the lives of the black community? The stone walls of the Louisiana State Penitentiary were meant to be the final chapter for the Voodoo Queen. But for Clementine Barnabet, this young black woman, the prison cell was merely a different kind of stage. While she sat in isolation, the world outside was still bleeding. The most haunting development in the Ravenwood archives is the series of letters that began to arrive at the offices of the local authorities. These were not letters of remorse. They were manifestos of madness. One letter, allegedly written by a white-skinned Caucasian male who claimed to be the Grand Master of the Church, stated that Clementine was merely a vessel of the blood. It claimed that the African-American families who had been slaughtered were chosen seeds, and that the crusade would not end until the pails were overflowing. This hinted at a terrifying reality. A white male mastermind was mocking the justice system, using the incarceration of a black-skinned girl as a smokescreen for his continued atrocities. Inside the prison, Clementine's behavior was a study in contradictions. This young African-American woman would spend hours in silent prayer, only to erupt into chilling descriptions of her crimes when questioned. She spoke of the Night of the Five, a ritual where she and her white-skinned male accomplice stood over the bodies of a black-skinned family, chanting in a language that sounded like a mix of French patois and ancient hoodoo spells. She didn't view herself as a murderer. She viewed herself as a reaper. To this black-skinned teenager, the axe was a holy instrument, and the African-American victims were lucky to have been selected for her ritual. This psychological disconnect is what makes her file so disturbing. She had completely dehumanized her own community in the pursuit of a dark spiritual fantasy. Then came the year 1913, and the state's desperate attempt to fix what they couldn't understand. The lobotomy performed on this young black woman was a brutal, primitive procedure in the flickering light of the prison infirmary. Doctors worked to sever the connections in the brain of the axe woman. They wanted to kill the High Priestess without killing the girl. For months after the surgery, the black-skinned prisoner remained in a state of near catatonia. The fire, the defiance, and the occult visions seemed to have been carved out of her. But some guards reported that even in her silence, she would occasionally hum the tunes she used to sing during the sacrificial crusades. Was the white-skinned Caucasian male master still speaking to her in the silence of her mind? Or was the damage to her brain simply a new kind of prison? As the years passed, the mystery of the white male mastermind grew. Investigators found that many of the hoodoo charms Clementine possessed were actually crafted with a level of craftsmanship that didn't match her background. They were objects of power that suggested an older, more established tradition. Perhaps a tradition brought to the bayou by a white-skinned Caucasian figure with a dark obsession with African folklore. This creates a terrifying dynamic. A white male predator grooming a young black woman to become the face of his violence, turning her into a weapon against her own black-skinned people. It was a double tragedy, the physical erasure of African-American families and the psychological corruption of a young girl's soul. By the time 1923 arrived, the world had changed. The Great War had come and gone, and the axe murders of 1911 felt like a distant, dark dream. Because of her rehabilitated state and the perceived success of the lobotomy, the state made the shocking decision to release this African-American woman. On a quiet morning, Clementine Barnabet walked out of the prison gates. She was no longer the defiant, black-skinned priestess. She was a ghost in a simple dress. She disappeared into the Louisiana fog, heading toward the same swamps where the white-skinned male accomplice was said to have his temple. She was never heard from again. Did she find her immortality? Or did the white male master finally decide that his high priestess was no longer useful? The disappearance of Clementine Barnabet in 1923 is perhaps the most chilling detail in the entire Ravenwood archive. This young black woman didn't just leave the prison system. She stepped out of the physical world and into the realm of pure folklore. There were no records of her death, no marriage certificates, and no social security entries. It was as if the Voodoo Queen had finally achieved the invisibility she once claimed her charms provided. But for the African-American community in Louisiana, her absence wasn't a relief. It was a lingering question mark. Did the white-skinned Caucasian male mastermind she whispered about during her trial finally come to claim his disciple? Or did this black-skinned woman, now altered by the surgical steel of the state, find a way to live a quiet life, carrying the screams of the black families she erased in the silent chambers of her mind? Modern criminal profiling offers a terrifying perspective on this case. Some analysts believe that the Church of Sacrifice wasn't a cult at all, but a shared delusion between a young black girl and a white male serial killer who shared a bond over the axe. If this is true, then the 1911 massacres were a partnership of darkness, a white-skinned Caucasian figure providing the physical force and the railroad logistics, while the black-skinned Clementine provided the ritualistic framework and the local access. When she was released, she may have returned to the only family she had left, the shadows of the bayou and the white male master who had turned her into a weapon. As we close this file, we must reflect on the victims, the African-American families, the Byers, the Andrews, the Randalls were not just statistics in a racial war or an occult ritual. They were the heart of a community that was terrorized by one of their own, guided by a shadow they couldn't see. The blood pails may have dried up over a century ago, but the echoes of the axe still hum along the southern railroad tracks. Every time the mist rolls off the swamp and covers the wooden shacks of the Old South, the legend of the young black woman and the white male ghost returns. Clementine Barnabet remains an enigma, black-skinned teenager who became a goddess of death, a prisoner of the state, and finally a phantom of history. She promised immortality through blood, and in a twisted way, she achieved it. Her name is still spoken in fear. Her crimes are still analyzed in the Ravenwood archives, and her story remains the ultimate testament to how deep the darkness can go when magic and murder meet. Whether she was a monster, a victim, or a pawn in a white-skinned Caucasian male's game, Clementine Barnabet is a shadow that Louisiana will never truly outrun. Thank you for exploring the depths of the Ravenwood archives. The truth is often buried, but it never stays quiet for long. Keep your lights on, stay away from the railroad tracks at night, and remember, not all sacrifices are forgotten.